In 2022, Indonesia made a decision that confused the entire world. They picked a patch of jungle, no roads, no buildings, no people, and they said, this is where we're building our new capital city, not expanding an existing one, not rebuilding a damaged one, starting from zero, on purpose. Most countries move their capitals out of desperation, war, disaster, political collapse. Indonesia moved theirs during a period of relative stability, which made the question louder: why? The old capital, Jakarta, wasn't destroyed. It wasn't abandoned. It was still home to over 10 million people, but something was happening beneath that city, something that couldn't be stopped, something that made the government realize if they stayed, they might not have a choice later. So they made the choice now. They called the new city Nusantara, and they began building it in the middle of Borneo, a place most Indonesians had never visited, a place with no infrastructure, no urban history, no obvious reason to exist. And yet, when you look at the data, the science, and the geography, the decision starts to make a strange kind of sense. This is the story of why Indonesia walked away from one of the most populated cities on earth, and why that might have been the smartest thing they ever did. Jakarta was sinking, not metaphorically, not slowly, in some distant theoretical future. It was physically dropping into the ground. Scientists had been measuring it for years, and the numbers were alarming. Some parts of North Jakarta were sinking at a rate of 25 centimeters per year. That's not a crack in the pavement. That's a city disappearing. By 2050, researchers projected that nearly 1/3 of Jakarta could be permanently submerged, not flooded after a storm, permanently underwater. And here's what made it worse. The city itself was causing it. Jakarta sits on swampy, low-lying land. For decades, millions of residents had been pumping groundwater from wells beneath the city because the official water supply wasn't reaching everyone. So, people drilled down, and as the water was pulled out, the soil above it compacted, layer by layer, year by year. The ground beneath one of the world's most populated cities was hollowing out from the inside. Engineers warned about it. Geologists published papers about it, and then the government ran the numbers on fixing it. The cost to save Jakarta, to build seawalls, replace the groundwater infrastructure, reinforce the foundations, is estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars for a city that was still sinking even as they planned. That's when a quiet conversation started inside the Indonesian government. Not publicly, not yet. But behind closed doors, senior officials began asking a question no one wanted to say out loud. What if saving Jakarta isn't the answer? That question didn't stay behind closed doors for long. In 2019, President Joko Widodo stood in front of the nation and made it official. Indonesia would move its capital. The reaction was immediate. Economists questioned the timing. Urban planners questioned the logic. Ordinary Jakartans questioned everything, because this wasn't just about moving government offices. This was about abandoning the symbolic heart of a nation of 270 million people, a city that had been the capital since independence in 1945. But Widodo had done his homework. His team hadn't chosen Borneo randomly. They had studied over a dozen candidate locations across the archipelago. They looked at earthquake risk, tsunami exposure, floodplains, volcanic activity. Indonesia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Almost every major island carries some form of geological danger, but East Kalimantan, the region they chose on Borneo, was different. It sat away from the major fault lines. It had lower seismic risk than Java. It had no history of devastating tsunamis, and it was almost exactly at the geographic center of Indonesia. For a country spread across 17,000 islands, that mattered. A capital on Java had always meant Java came first, politically, economically, culturally. Moving to Borneo was also a statement, a deliberate rebalancing of an entire nation. But here's what the government didn't fully advertise. The land they chose wasn't empty because it was ideal. It was empty for a reason, and that reason was still there, waiting. The land chosen for Nusantara wasn't pristine wilderness. It was already scarred. Decades of coal mining and palm oil plantations had stripped large sections of East Kalimantan bare. The forest that once stood there was gone. The soil was degraded. The rivers carried sediment from years of industrial runoff. In other words, Malsi, the government hadn't chosen untouched jungle. They had chosen a wound. And their argument was simple. If you're going to build something massive, build it where the damage is already done. Don't destroy new forest. Rebuild what was already broken. On paper, it sounded responsible, but environmentalists weren't convinced. Because Borneo isn't just any island, it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. Orangutans, pygmy elephants, clouded leopards, species that exist nowhere else on Earth, live in the forests surrounding the construction zone, and construction doesn't stay inside its boundaries. Roads get built, workers arrive, supply chains cut through untouched areas. Wildlife corridors get fragmented. Researchers on the ground started documenting it almost immediately. Orangutans displaced from their habitat, moving closer to human settlements. Pygmy elephants crossing into areas they'd never been seen before. The forest was reacting. And then came the detail that stopped some planners cold. Beneath parts of the Nusantara site, beneath the roads being poured and the government buildings being framed, the soil wasn't as stable as the initial surveys suggested. Peat layers. Deep ones, the kind that shift under heavy load, the kind that, when they dry out, don't just sink, they burn. Peat fires in Borneo aren't a new problem. They're one of the worst environmental disasters on the planet. When peat dries out and ignites, it doesn't burn on the surface like a normal fire. It burns underground, slowly, silently, for months. In 2015, peat fires across Kalimantan released more carbon in a single season than the entire United States economy produces in a year. The haze choked cities across Southeast Asia. Schools closed. Airports shut down. Men were hospitalized by the thousands. And now, engineers were discovering peat beneath the future capital of Indonesia. The government didn't deny it. They said they had a plan. Special drainage management, controlled water table levels, advanced soil reinforcement techniques. But critics pointed out something uncomfortable. Every major peat management project in Southeast Asia had faced the same problem. Once you build on peat, you change it permanently. You alter the water flow. You dry it out in ways that are difficult to reverse. And Nusantara wasn't a small project. It was designed to eventually house 1.9 million people, government ministries, military headquarters, a presidential palace, all of it sitting above ground that could, under the wrong conditions, become fuel. But here's where the story takes a turn that almost nobody expected. In 2024, Indonesia held a presidential election. Widodo's chosen successor didn't win the environmental argument, but the new administration inherited the project mid-construction. Billions already spent, thousands of workers already on site, and a city half built in the middle of a jungle, with no one actually living there yet. The question was no longer whether to build Nusantara. The question was whether anyone would actually come. That question had a real answer, and it wasn't encouraging. By early 2024, Nusantara had roads. It had government building. It had a presidential palace, half finished, rising out of the jungle canopy. But it had almost no residents. Civil servants ordered to relocate were pushing back. Their families were in Jakarta. Their children's schools were in Jakarta. Their entire lives were rooted in a city they were now being asked to leave. Some officials were commuting by plane, flying into Nusantara for meetings, then flying back to Jakarta the same evening, a capital city being used like a conference center, and the private investment that was supposed to flood in, the hotels, the businesses, the commercial districts, was arriving slower than projected. Investors were watching carefully. A city needs people to function. People need reasons to come. And right now Nusantara was offering neither. But then something shifted. The Indonesian government quietly changed its strategy. Instead of forcing relocation, they began offering incentives. Tax breaks for businesses that moved operations to Nusantara. Subsidized housing for government workers who transferred permanent, a new university campus, a technology corridor, infrastructure connecting the city to the coast. They stopped selling Nusantara as a solution to Jakarta's problems and started selling it as something else entirely, an opportunity, a blank page, a place where the mistakes of the old city didn't have to be repeated. And slowly, very slowly, people began to arrive, not in the thousands yet, but enough to matter. Jakarta is still sinking, and Nusantara is still rising. Which one survives the next 50 years is a question only time will answer. If you want to follow stories like this one, real decisions, real consequences, real stakes, subscribing takes 1 second, and it's always worth it.